Before the crows chose her, Akiko Ashwing was known for one thing: losing. She lost sparring matches to children younger than herself. She lost archery contests. She lost races through the forest paths. Whenever the children of the court trained together, someone else always stood at the front of the line, while Akiko limped in somewhere behind them. Her instructors often shook their heads. Too slow and too reckless, they agreed. Yet every time she was knocked into the dirt, she stood back up, brushed the mud from her armor, and asked to try again. While the other children celebrated their victories, Akiko studied her failures. When a strike missed, she practiced it 100 times more. When she lost a duel, she returned the next morning to challenge the same opponent again. She never seemed angry about losing, only determined to improve. Little did she know back then that all that losing would win her both a prize and a burden far greater than she ever dared imagine. Meet Akiko Ashwing, a fairy samurai champion still needing to prove herself despite being chosen by the spirits themselves for a task they deemed her fittest to complete. If only she knew what that task was. And welcome, traveler, to the Tavern on the Morrow, where all come to gather at the threshold to adventure. I'm your host, Ben Grimm, the owner of this fine and somewhat dusty establishment, and this week I wanted to explore a samurai character. The reason for that is very simple. I showed a Kill Bill 1 to my film student class of film students not too long ago. I hadn't seen the movie in a while. I always enjoyed it. I actually think Volume 2 may be a little bit better, but both of them are really fun. And got me thinking, well, I think it's time to dip my toes into another samurai. A samurai was one of the first characters I made. When I first started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I think I was 13 or 14 years old. It was in 8th grade. Actually, my first character was a ranger, and then after that I had an assassin. But we got a real campaign going at one point, and I was actually playing two characters. We had a fairly small group of friends that were playing. I played a bard and a samurai, and they were very different, but it was kind of interesting sort of oscillating between those two personalities. But it was really one of the more memorable campaigns. That's where we played Vecna Lives, among other modules and adventures. I believe these characters also dipped their toes into Ravenloft at one point. But that samurai, I mean, he had a Greek-sounding name, and he was very Western in nature, and I don't know that my young high school mind really understood samurai very well. I don't know that my old high school mind understands samurai very well. But after watching Kill Bill, I got really interested in making a female samurai character, and I started thinking about what race or species combination or ancestry would make sense for that. And I kind of fell on fairy. I think the aesthetic is very cool of just, a winged, dragonfly winged samurai female character. But there were a couple of things that made sense to me thematically about that combination. One of them is the wooden and bamboo armor that sort of would fit more with the Fae aesthetic a little bit. Not that Fae are all necessarily allergic to iron, but in some ways, like that woodland and tree-based and nature-based aesthetic kind of fit the mold, I think. I also started thinking about the fact that with these feudal societies and the rigor of sort of discipline that comes with the mythology of samurai and sort of structure and sort of following a very precise dogma also made sense in the realm of the Fae and a Fae court, because the realm of the Fae is such a chaotic, whimsical, and strange place. I thought in those instances where you had cities and villages and civilization that were maintained by fairies who were not necessarily like completely immersed in that world of chaos and whimsy and sort of, wild magic, that discipline and order and structure would actually be incredibly important to these civilizations. And in that sense, I think a samurai actually makes a ton of sense. And I wrestled with a while for like, what's the right way to go? Because I really wanted to make sure that Akiko was sort of built on this premise of discipline. And I was dabbling with the idea of like, is there some sort of paladin subclass that might make sense? I like most people, I don't particularly like the samurai subclass that you can find in 5e. So what I really looked at were different approaches to that. And I did not settle on paladin. I don't know that the divine magic element quite resonated with my interpretation. So while I like the oaths, and certainly I thought either I could sort of jury rig an oath, or I could sort of, come up with something, or just use one of the ones that already exists as a kind of, oath to a shogun lord or a lord that a samurai would follow. But in the end, I actually settled, those things are role-playing things, and I don't think they necessarily need to be tied into the subclass. And because I didn't like the divine magic, I kind of went a different route and moved her into the realm of a battle master fighter combined with a scout. And the scout thing really plays more into her task, her mission as a samurai, in this particular world, or at least in the sense that I've created her, because she does a lot of patrol work, and I thought that kind of made sense then to combine the battle master, which gives you a lot of fun to play with in terms of feats and interesting powers, and then blend her with the scout to give her that kind of wandering rogue, and then to remove all the magic as well, because I think, as much as I like characters who can cast spells, I think when I think of samurai, I don't necessarily think of wizards. I think of characters who are devoted to the sword, and who are devoted to the spear, and who are devoted to the bow, and they master those martial tools and don't necessarily rely on magic to do the great things that they do. I thought the folk hero background works for her as well, and these things I'll dip into a little bit later. There's a guide that you can follow if you're interested in download, if you want to play this character as a player character. And I've also created a character sheet for her that if you find that she's interesting from a background perspective to use as an NPC, I've got some stats you can go for there. So if you want to play her as a player, there's a general guide you can follow that sort of weaves in this idea of mobility. And to me, one of the key aspects was the charge. And of course, fairies can fly, which I think is kind of fun. But, when I think of samurais, I think of those great scenes in, say, The Seven Samurai, where the hero, the characters have the duel, and the one samurai will charge the other and do one sort of devastating strike, or they just have that one swing. And I know that charge is kind of a lousy feat. I don't know that I know that. I haven't played a character with charge, but the general consensus seems to be that it's not a great feat. But boy, do I like that thematic aesthetic. And if, so she's got a lot of mobility. She moves around a lot. She's built on sort of getting in there and also dipping out. And that's why I thought the rogue with the scout combo and mobility feats and movement-oriented feats kind of fit the idea of this character. And she's not a coward, but she moves around the battlefield in a very sort of elegant and I think, exciting way. With wings, it's going to be even more exciting because she's not even stuck to the ground. So there's this whole idea of sort of taking that samurai charge and lifting it into the air and having a lot of fun with that. But without further ado, I introduce you more deeply into the character of Akiko Ashwing. Akiko Ashwing looks far more like a traveler than a noble samurai. Though she serves one of the oldest houses of the Vale Marches, years spent patrolling lonely roads and wandering the borderlands have left their mark upon her. Her armor is practical and weathered, showing scratches, dents, and careful repairs accumulated over countless journeys. It is clear that every piece has a story behind it. She wears layered samurai armor of dark lacquered wood and steel designed for movement rather than ceremony. At her hip hang a katana and wakizashi, both meticulously maintained despite the wear visible on the rest of her equipment. Across her back rests a great bow of moonwood nearly as tall as she is, wrapped in protective cloth from years spent traveling through rain, mist, and forest. Her long black hair is usually tied back to keep it out of her face while riding or scouting. Behind her, a pair of dragonfly-like wings shimmer with silver and charcoal patterns. They are beautiful, but not pristine. Small tears, old scars, and worn edges speak of a life built on hard choices. She carries herself with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned to rely on persistence rather than glory. Dust often clings to her boots, a travel cloak hangs from her shoulders, and her gaze is constantly moving, watching the road ahead. More than anything else, she looks like someone who belongs between worlds, a guardian of forgotten paths, ancient treaties, and the wild frontier where the mortal realm meets the Fae. For centuries, the Black Crows of Moonpetal had served as silent judges of the Vale Marches. Older than the house itself, they appeared whenever great oaths were sworn and chose each generation's champions. No one knew what they truly were, spirits, gods, or something even older, only that their judgment had never been questioned. The chosen came once in a generation. Veteran spirit hunters, noble heirs, and renowned duelists gathered beneath the open sky, each hoping to earn the favor of the crows. Lord Hanami Moonpetal presided over the ceremony while the candidates stood waiting for the ancient birds to make their decision. Akiko Ashwing was not among the supplicants. At 12 years old, she was far too young to be considered. She'd only been brought to assist her family and sit quietly through the proceedings. Instead, she slipped away from the crowd and sat atop a nearby stone wall overlooking the ceremony. There she noticed a single crow watching her. Bored and irritated by the endless pageantry below, she began talking to it. She complained about the ceremony, mocked the candidates, questioned why everyone spent so much time pretending to be honorable instead of simply being honorable. The crow merely watched and offered no reply. Akiko kept talking and did not notice when another crow arrived. Then another, then many more. Without realizing it, Akiko had gathered an audience. Nobles and warriors watched in confusion as crows left the ceremony and flocked to the young fairy sitting alone on the wall. Still, Akiko continued her one-sided argument. Finally, when she ran out of things to say, the last of the crows abandoned the ceremony. The entire sky seemed black with wings. A hush fell over the assembly. Then a single crow descended and landed upon Akiko's shoulder. None of the candidates had been chosen. No contest had yet been held. The crows had ignored every warrior, every noble heir, and every celebrated champion. Instead, they chose a 12-year-old girl who had spent the ceremony complaining about it. To this day, no one knows why. Some say the crows admired her honesty. Others believe they saw destiny hidden from mortal eyes. But those closest to Lord Hanami remember that while the court celebrated, he did not smile. For in all the history of the Vale Marches, the crows had never chosen a child before.